studying one of America's most important concepts, a city upon a hill. Hello there, my fellow CGS students and those striving to pass the APUSH exam. Today in our video, we'll be discussing the period of 1607 to 1754. We're going to start in 1607 when Jamestown was first established. Jamestown was funded by a joint stock company, meaning investors bought the right to establish it from the Virginia Company of London. While many settlers were excited for their newfound opportunities for wealth, prosperity, and basically money and shiny new things, at least half of them ended up dead because of starvation and disease. Jamestown kept going, however, since ships kept coming with more super excited people. Except for Captain John Smith, who thought that lazy people don't get to eat. Too bad he got injured in a gunpowder explosion, so he couldn't keep that going. Unfortunately, the angry Powhatan Confederacy thought, hey, since Captain John Smith is dead, why are we still feeding these white people? After 4 years of super fun, exciting settler time, the years between 1609 and 1610 quickly became the starving time, where 90% of Jamestown's residents died or came close to dying of starvation, and that resulted to cannibalism. Any other survivors ran into English ships looking for supplies and other people to socialize with. John Rolfe, one of the survivors who married Pocahontas, told the natives and English settlers to calm their tits, and thought, hey, maybe this brown stuff, tobacco, is actually good, and pioneered the practice of growing it. Too bad the Native Americans were already using it as a cash crop for England. God damn it, Native Americans. However, people didn't care who started it. While people were enjoying their delicious cancer-causing tobacco, other people thought, well, if we need to grow more of this, we're going to need some more land and people to farm it for us because heaven forbid we do it ourselves. That's what they did. This led to plantation slavery, and the settlement soon became known as the Chesapeake. Who wanted to go to the Chesapeake were sick of the crowding and diseases, specifically in England. They soon discovered the service of indentured servitude, where those who took part in it would provide 7 years of hard work for free passage, then receive their freedom. Not a bad deal. They also received some property, which, you know what that means, they get to vote and survive! Congratulations! In 1618, the Virginia Company made a comeback with the headright system. A headright was a tract of land that was granted to colonists and settlers. This became the basis for an emerging aristocracy. However, these grants violated the rights of the Native Americans, who thought differently of property ownership than the Europeans. Soon, the House of Burgesses was established, where anyone could vote. Anyone as long as they were white, male, and had property. These decisions, however, had to be approved by the Virginia Company, which soon brought the subject of slavery into the matter. Now the French are getting involved, and they take Quebec City. Very few colonists came to the French territory in Canada since it was cold AF, and the French government didn't give them incentives to leave France and the dissented Huguenots, French Protestants, which were legally Huguenot allowed to emigrate. Knock knock is religion. Roman Catholicism, to be specific. Try as religion, they said. The Indians were all like, oh yeah, no thank you, and frowned at their diseases they brought with them. The French didn't mind though, and neither did the Indians mind of them. They traded furs and fought in that French and Indian war together, as buddies. Not really as buddies, because they were against each other, but... Finally, more people show up. The English Calvinists brought the idea of Puritanism, where they wanted to purify the Anglican Church of Roman Catholic practices. However, they really weren't wanted there, so they were like, fine, we'll go somewhere else. Separatists, who were part of the Puritans, gave up on the idea of the Church of England being reformed, so they left. They boarded the Mayflower to go to Virginia, but ended up going off course and ending up in Massachusetts, and thought, hey, this is alright, but it needs a new name, and called it Plymouth. The Pilgrims were a pretty organized group. They established a basic legal system, the Mayflower Compact, which states that the government's power derives from the consent of the governed and not from God, which is something that absolutists were like, insert swear word here, you're right. There was this guy, John Winthrop, who was elected the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, who envisioned the colonies as a city upon a hill. Hint, hint. For the first couple of years, it went pretty well. No slave labor, governed by a general court, yet it was pretty different from the Massachusetts colony. Also, Virginia was full of single men at the time, so ladies. The main purpose for the Massachusetts Bay Colony was to be a place to serve God, and if you didn't want to do that, then you could be shunned and leave. Just like Anne Hutchinson, who challenged Puritan beliefs and wanted to share her beliefs, but was told by the common folk, who believed that women shouldn't have a voice, and also that she was crazy because she received revelations from God, please leave. So there were also other people who established new colonies as well, such as Thomas Hooker and John Davenport. In 1662, Hooker's colony hooked up with Davenport's colony to create Connecticut. In the meantime, Maryland set up a refuge for English Catholics, by George Calvert, and proprietary colonies that were also set up, which weren't given to a stock company, but instead to people. All of the people who were inhabiting these newfound colonies, aka those super excited people, were impacted by diseases and the introduction of agricultural products, such as new crops from the Europeans. And of course, Native American populations were dwindling because we kept killing them. Thanks, white people. Now, as people were investigating new ideas as to how to function in a well-maintained society, mercantilism came into view. This meant that the government should strictly regulate the state's economy by owning them using tariffs, meaning taxes on imports, and monopolies so that the states would export more than they would import. The American colonies really supported this idea because it would produce more raw materials and crops. Finally, we're doing something somewhat good. Now we come to the Quakers, who wanted to restore the simplicity and spirituality of early Christianity, received their own colony thanks to a close friend of Charles II, which became Pennsylvania. Then, of course, we're still fighting with the Indians in the Pueblo Revolt, where the Pueblos fought the Spanish to drive them out of their region because everyone wants land. Still. In 1692, they came back with more accommodating attitudes so that they don't get driven out again. Then there's this guy, Charles II, who didn't like the Dutch since they were obsessed with trading, and he was all, no, let me monopolize. As a result of this, the Navigation Acts made that certain products could only be shipped to England, which really pissed off the American colonies, and the Dutch were all like, fight me. And England was all, this sucks, because they wanted to keep trading with the Dutch, so this one guy, Edmund Randolph, called the British government to reduce Massachusetts to obedience. In 1684, the Massachusetts Bay Colony intentionally violated Navigation Acts, so the British court said, hey man bro, you can't do that, so we're going to take all your power and put it all under one guy named Sir Edward Andros. People in Virginia, including the single men, did not like the Navigation Acts because tobacco prices dropped significantly and blamed Sir William Berkeley for this. Those who really opposed Berkeley formed a club called We Hate the William Berkeley Club and planned a rebellion. Specifically, Bacon's Rebellion, where people were extremely angry about the policies towards Native Americans and how to govern the colony, so they're like, if we don't have control, then nobody will, and decided to take their anger out on burning Jamestown. The issue of slavery arises more dominantly here. They were part of the triangular trade system that starts in Africa, where they sent slaves to America, and raw materials went from America to Europe, and finished products went to Africa and America. The shipping of slaves was known as the Middle Passage since it passed through the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. African Americans died during this trip, and those enslaved in America worked on small plantations and farmed. They were brought together, however, culturally and by their rage for the slave system, just like how we are with high school. Their hatred fueled a number of revolts, most famously the Stono Rebellion, where several plantation owners were killed. This led and resulted in harsher treatment of slaves. While the New England colonies were being ruled by Andros, who turned out to be terrible. The Glorious Revolution, however, was the opportunity to remove James II from the throne and replace by William and Mary. They put Andros in jail, and because the colonists were so thankful, they pledged their loyalty to them. Then they found out that William and Mary liked control over colonial affairs, and then they didn't like them as much. Meanwhile, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there were tensions between different ideals. Puritans believed in tightly knit farming communities, and others believed that colonies should be based on trade and commerce. So you know what that means. Time to condemn the witches! This was known as the Salem Witch Trials of 1692, where although several women were killed before the acts, but especially in this year, because of a larger group of women were displaying strange behavior like believing in trade and commerce or capitalism, gasp! Almost all the accusers were part of the older farm communities, and those accused were part of the newer farm communities because that makes sense. Illuminati confirmed. Conspiracy all along. After this, there were a lot of wars, starting with King William's War from 1689 to 1697, where New England and the Iroquois fought against the French and the Algonquins. I think I said that right, oh well. It was ended with the Treaty of Ryswick that reaffirmed the previous colonial boundaries and gave French Haiti, so they were pretty happy, probably. The development of colonial assemblies soon came to be, which were groups formed by upper-class people who discussed their ideas, which Britain wasn't really fond of. They knew that a storm was to be brewing. The era of salutary neglect came to be, involving George and George II, who desired self-government for the colonies. No one cared for politics of the colonies at the time, since the British cared more for defending their own territories. The First Great Awakening came into place where ministers thought local ministers did not practice their religion enough. George Whitefield, one of these preachers, was greatly appreciated by the public with his speeches and messages about religion. So many preachers went around sharing their wisdom and speeches about the horrors of hell, which made English congregations stirred to greater religious devotion. A number of super smart colleges, such as Yale and Princeton, were founded to train these ministers who went around telling speeches. Overall, the awakening reinforced the question that the religious authority and a sense of social equality, which they somehow found to relate to politics, which of course leads to more future events that we will not talk about here because the period is over! Bye!